internet people can catch up. Ah, we are live. But I need to get my live cam. Okay, here is the live.
Oh. Maybe we should add another table?
Yeah, maybe you should add another table.
There weren't more people here when we started, so.
Just smaller.
Yeah.
Okay. Why is that?
3 more?
Yeah.
I think we should add another table. A few people can line them in as well. So. If you like, up the line. There is also some space under it. Yeah.
Okay. Haha! Right. Now we have video. No. Aha! That's why I can't grab it. I made my video for my streaming people. The video is in the wrong place. Right. That's because yesterday when I was doing the professional programming, on Friday when I was doing the professional programming course, I needed to zoom in the camera. So, right, that's fine. Wow, the stream is going all over the place. Right. Just move that to here. Down to here. Right. Okay. So we have Google Translate. Right, okay, so the stream has content, we have content, and I can go to Blackboard. Okay, so today we are discussing 2 papers on learning to program. Now, as most of you are programmers or have learned some programming in the past, I was hoping that you would be able to have a reasonable understanding of what was trying to be taught in these 2. The coding game is nice that it's online, you can all use it and try it out, and hopefully you'll have your own opinions of it, and we can discuss the quality of these 2 papers and some of the flaws in what they've done. Hopefully the students will identify flaws. I've got a long list of flaws that I would like to also hopefully be found by you guys and discussed. Okay, so shall we start with Andreas, and you're doing the coding game? Yep. Okay, so if we turn you around and point back the screen. So what kind of input do you have?
HDMI.
You have HDMI, right?
Yeah.
So we'll have to go through this one. Can you get straight in here? There we go. Yes, all the way around. Spin the audience around. Hello internet people. It's gone all blurry. Oh. Okay. First of all, did you all read these 2 papers? Yeah. Good, excellent. Neither of them were hard to read in a sense of being technically complex, so you should have been able to read them relatively quickly. Okay, so, turning it on. Where's the remote? Ah, you've got the remote. Have you pressed the button? Is something flashing?
Yeah, still is.
Oh, yep, it's making noise. Okay, so as you might, so one of the areas that I think is interesting and not discussed in this is, and something I discuss with some of my game programmers, is of all of the things you do as a programmer, I find optimization is the most game-like. Right? And the reason why I say that is that when you've got code that works, okay, you've lowered consequences, right? So while you've got code that isn't working, that's like a problem, right? And so that's quite stressful. But once you've got code that's working and you're just trying to make it faster, that's lowered consequences. You've also got a neat way of measuring yourself and measuring yourself against other people who are trying to optimize the same code, right? Because you've got this, like, can I make it faster? Can I make it faster? And you tinkle with stuff, try it and get immediate feedback, right? So unlike things like debugging, where you feel like you're hitting your head against the wall for a long time and you have no idea when it's going to fix, right? That doesn't feel like you're not getting lots of positive feedback. Whereas when you optimize things, because your code is working, every time you try it, you get feedback because it's already working. And you're just looking for that small gain. And if you're working in a group of people who are all optimizing the same code, you can make it very game-like, because I can have like a high score list of who's been able to make it run the fastest, right? And you get lots of agency of, oh, maybe if I try this, or I'll try a new data structure, or I'll try and make it parallel. I can experiment and see the results of those experiments quite quickly, right? So one of the things that you have to watch out for programmers is you get into the I'm having fun optimizing loop, where you don't progress in making more features for your code or getting the product done. You're just playing with optimizing the code that currently works. Right? And you can also lead to pre-optimization, where students see something and go, oh, I can make that faster, even though they haven't finished actually working on the rest of the product yet. Right? Because that idea to play and to make it better is quite strong. Okay, so the coding game.
Can't play for the remote because it doesn't.
Right, so remote.
To be working.
Let's
Maybe
go
I'll switch some channels.
search. Have you put it on?
It's on duplicate. That should work.
And it should go 3, 2, 1. Next one, HDMI. Okay, I'm too fast. Computer 1? Really? You're going to go computer 1 before you go to HDMI? Searching.
That's really lengthy search.
That's really trying hard to find it. Should be the next one.
Oh.
No. It's the USB. There's the HDMI.
And
No input detected. That's you. So let's try forcing it to.
change it to duplicate again. Oh,
There
there we go. Nice.
you go. Right.
Finally. Okay, so there we go. Yeah, I had the paper on students' perceptions of game-based learning using coding game. So I'm first going to give an overview over the paper itself and its components, and then I'll go through the questions
And we.
for the general, and then we'll have discussions afterwards.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. So, overview, or well, abstract. The paper basically consists of a discussion around game-based learning through the results of a pilot study. It's not a very big study.
No.
So, it looks at students' perceptions towards using solutions like coding game for learning introductory programming, basically. They used 33 first-year undergraduate students in the study, and they participated by trying out the game and then answering an online survey afterwards. And the findings of the study suggested that the students enjoyed the approach, and in some cases actually preferred it to regular conventional teaching methods. So for the introduction, it contains a somewhat brief history of serious games, I'd say, and as well as some previous research on the fact that students have been struggling with programming and finding motivation for it in 1998. So, yeah. And they mentioned that utilizing game-based learning is a kind of underexplored area in higher education at the very least. You'll probably see it more in primary school, secondary school, and so on. It also mentioned that other studies suggests that the students' perception of the actual game used kind of affects their learning experience. And the introduction then concludes with that it's probably useful to actually research what the students perceive of the game, of the approach to game-based learning, if you actually want to use it. So first off, before going into methods, just what is Coding Game? It's a web-based serious game platform, I guess you could say, that was released in 2015. And it kind of consists of a series of challenges and puzzles of varying difficulty, with support from most programming languages.
Who here had a go at the coding game?
I'm going to show it off anyways, so in any case. So basically the way it works is you're giving a puzzle, and you're supposed to solve it with code. So on the right hand side of the screen you have a code editor, you have some goals, you have some input and some output you have to provide. And then on the top left you have a game window that basically gives you feedback. So I'm just going to quickly go through the tutorial here, just to give an idea of how it works. So here you basically have a spaceship that's attacked by robots, I guess. And the goal is basically to shoot the closest enemy. By default, it for example only shoots at one enemy and you lose instantly. So okay, you fail. Well, how do you fix that? Well, you're supposed to shoot the one that is closest to you every time. So you have been provided some input here. So you can check, for example, that the distance, if distance 1 is closer than distance 2, then you, for example, output enemy 1. Otherwise, you just output enemy 2. And then you can rerun the program, and hopefully it should work. Yep, seems like it.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's basically the way coding game works on a basic level. It's just a bunch of puzzles and challenges, and yeah.
And actually, it doesn't look at the simulation at all.
No.
It just uses the text. Input output text matching, right? The
Yeah.
simulation, the whole pretty shooting thing is just to make you happy while you watch it do its job.
And from what I've seen, it doesn't seem like it cares too much about your code, but rather the output that
It
you
is
provide.
only the output it
Yes.
cares about. Yes.
Sometimes it cares about the time
Okay.
for the output.
Oh yeah.
For the
It also,
performance.
yeah. If you take too long, it can also.
Yeah, okay. That's fine. Okay, so on to methods. Basically, the study was conducted at Southampton Solent University in the UK, I'd imagine. So this was handled during the academic year of 2015 to 2016. And they had 33 participants in total that were like taking an introductory programming course at the time. So each of them completed the coding game tutorial, and then they solved 3 to 5 challenges within 90 minutes. The amount of challenges they solved depended on how fast it was and how challenging. So yeah. They were also asked to complete an online survey after finishing, and this kind of consisted of 16 different questions that were on like strongly disagree to strongly agree answer scale.
So you guys have seen the Likert scale
Yeah,
before?
Likert
Yep.
scale.
You're all good with that, yep.
And at the end they have one open-ended question, so they can have some qualitative response basically. And incomplete responses were not allowed. So they kind of categorized the results into 3 different categories. I'm just going to go through them. So the first one was the participants' attitudes towards both studying and games and so on, just to see what they like and not like. 67% of the sample enjoyed studying. 60% did not find the course boring. I'd imagine they mean the introductory programming course. 55% of them felt that they got good grades. So there's somewhat of a difference between people who actually like studying and actually feel like they get good at it. And 79% actually like playing video games, so that's a pretty big majority. And 61% of them thought that video games could be educational. So in general, it's suggested that participants at the very least are receptive to game-based learning. But at the same time, you know, that gives you a pretty skewed sample. Because, yes,
Yep, actually.
80% of them like games.
Sampling. How were those 33 students recruited?
Sample.
Yeah. So we'll get back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next category is like, what was their experience using coding game? 76% of them actually found it helpful, 73% found it interesting, 82% found it challenging, and 3% actually indicated that this wasn't helpful or it was very easy.
By 3%?
That's probably 1. Or something.
Out of 33?
Yes.
That's one person.
Yes. So it
3% is kind of misleading a little.
Yes. So you have one person who doesn't like games.
Yeah.
And who thinks he's good at the games apparently.
No, who at least doesn't think he's bad at games.
Yeah, basically.
But doesn't like games.
Yes.
And so he probably, so that's probably the person.
Probably.
And given there was 3% female, i.e. one girl, it's probably a he.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So in terms of their expectations towards game-based learning after trying coding game, 76% actually felt that, it could be worth using games for learning. 73% thought that they would like to use more of it when learning. 58% showed a preference for actually using it instead of traditional lectures and approaches. And in terms of whether they wanted to replace all their subjects with games, it was a pretty even split. So it was more perfectly normally distributed answer-wise. They also include a thematic analysis of the qualitative answers, but it's not used anywhere in the later discussions, so I don't think it's useful to mention too much about it. So in their discussion chapter, it's pretty short, but they mentioned at the very least that each participant had completed an introductory unit to programming and problem solving using Python. I don't know what I meant by unit, but some small course.
British, the British.
Okay, yeah.
Use that for courses.
Basically they justified that we used coding game over a self-made solution because it was a small study and they had time constraints. And they also mentioned that a game-based approach to learning in this setting could be worth exploring based on the results. At the same time, they kind of say that this is a small study, we have a small sample size, we have some limitations, so maybe it's a good idea to make a larger study that takes more time, has a larger sample size, and looks over things more in depth. For the conclusion, they kind of found that, well, students were at the very least receptive to game-based learning and would like more opportunities to use it, at the very least for this sample. Most of the students found the experience enjoyable, and some preferred it to standard approaches. So the overall conclusion kind of suggests that it would be worth exploring a game-based approach, complemented with some conventional techniques. So on to the question. Yeah. What does a paper contribute to the understanding of the field? Technically not so much.
Were most of you convinced that games might be interesting to study?
Yes.
Right. So this is the conclusion of this paper: is games might be interesting to study.
But that's not new exactly.
I don't think that's a very novel.
The setting is, I guess, somewhat different from, at the very least, what I've seen. But yeah. So, but at the very least, they provide some data from a minor sample, and it's probably a very skewed sample, given that 80% of them like games.
And we don't know, so one of my big problems with this paper is we don't know how they recruited those students in any way. Right? Did they go to the local gaming group and go to the IDDA club that they have on campus and go, right, who wants to see if they can learn programming from playing games? In the game student, there's nothing in here that tells you how they recruited these people.
Exactly.
Right?
And the results are, there's no possible way to make them generalizable, because you only have one person who doesn't like games.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have one person who said they didn't like it, and they don't mention, is this the same person?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's kind of confusing. Do the results presented actually justify the conclusions? Well, in general, I guess I'd say so, because they actually take their limitations into consideration. But it's not a very a bold conclusion or a bold statement or anything. It's just a suggestion on an approach, more or less.
Yeah. Did anybody notice anything specific in the discussion that shouldn't have been there?
Should they have mentioned that the fact that the previous experience, they had some previous experience been in the methods chapter instead, possibly? Or
well, so for me, there are two game-based learning systems,
right.
Scratch and Coding.
Code Compass.
Which are mentioned first in the discussion.
Right.
Not mentioned anywhere else in the paper. No results related to asking students how did it compare with these other things, asking whether or not the students had played them. Yeah. They're just telling me in the discussion afterwards
that they exist.
That they exist. Oh, and this is better than them. Right? It's kind of, what? That's completely new information, no evidence from anywhere else in the paper, no discussion of anywhere else in the paper, no results, nothing to compare with, just random statement plonked in the discussion. Don't do that. It's bad to just add new things in that area where you've got absolutely, like, none of your study has led to anything that you can discuss about that.
Yeah.
Right?
I feel like that's kind of a problem in general with the paper. I think it will get there eventually. But does the title and abstract accurately reflect the content? Well, the title, more or less, yes. Like, they're studying students' perceptions on game-based learning with coding game. So, yeah. The abstract is also decent in terms of the content. It doesn't really mention the use of coding game, but you can kind of infer that from the title. You probably read the title before anyways. Yeah. So are the results repeatable? If not, what has been left out? Probably not repeatable, I'd say. First off, coding game is freely available, that's fine. But they didn't mention exactly when they used it or what version they used. So if you're like 10 years in the future and coding game still exists, it's probably a very different program at that time. The survey questions weren't exactly provided in an appendix or in the methods chapter. You basically got them, you got the results, and you kind of have to trace your way back and try to understand the whole picture, but we don't know if we have the whole picture, so it can be hard to know. They did mention the previous experience of the students and the time spent on it, so that's something. But they didn't mention what types of challenges they tried, they just said 3 to 5 challenges. And if you want to repeat the study, you probably want to know that. Does the solution justify the use of game elements? Not sure how applicable the question is to this paper, because they didn't create any solution really. They just proposed, yeah, use a game-based approach. So, uses game elements, yes, but... Does the paper contain an explicit problem statement describing research questions? I wouldn't say they outright give the problem statement, but it's kind of clear to you by the end of the introduction at the very least that this is what they want to look at. The unit of study is, as I mentioned, I feel kind of clearly described at the very least. And when it comes to relevant concepts, it's really light on theory. Like, there isn't much of a literature review, just, okay, serious games is a thing. And, yeah.
Serious games exists.
More or less. So yeah, it doesn't exactly help them build their arguments later on, because they haven't done so much. In terms of research goal, I think that's fairly clear, because they just wanted to learn what these students thought of coding game, at the very least. So that's the slides I have for this at the very least.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but thank you.
Yep.
Right. So, the discussion. So, the critique can be led by PMS. And I'm sure he has some critique, and I'm sure you'll probably join in.
We discussed quite a few points on both of them, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. There are, so these the two papers sort of have some complementary problems, but also some overlapping problems.
Mm.
So I think, yeah, so for me, sample size. What did any of you so before we get on PM, did anybody else notice anything that they were particularly kind of annoyed with?
I mean, the first thing I was annoyed with was that how straightforward it was. I mean, it was nothing to think about, because I mean, serious games can be beneficial, right?
Who would have thought?
Yes, it's revolutionary.
Revolutionary that theory games could be useful, and that students have opinions about them.
Yes.
Right.
And that's actually what they say in the introduction and the abstract, and also in the conclusion. So
I started here, I ended here. Where did I go in the middle? I don't. Yep. So it scarily, this sort of stuff gets published.
Yeah.
Right. I would expect all of you to do a better study than this.
How much better?
Well, yeah, within this course, you could have done that study, right? Because what you've got 30 people to do, spend 90 minutes, right? We've got 100 first year students, right? We've got a massively skewed sample in our first year students, right? I would have expected you to say that, right? And actually say how you recruited from our game development degree, right? Because that's going to be a skewed sample, right? The fact that we have a game development degree. the analysis, there's nothing complex about the analysis. They avoid the problems of doing the mean of Likert scales and averaging them and not doing the right stats.
It would be really nice to actually have some graphs on the data as well, and do not just numbers.
And not just numbers.
Some visualization at the very least.
Yeah.
Useful.
So yeah, it started somewhere, it ended up in the same place. That was one thing.
You also have the for Likert scale the I don't know option. And
yes.
I mean, I don't know if you are going to take one point there because, but I was thinking that it seemed like for me that the neither option was used where the author or the authors found it fit most for their point of view.
Yes. So there is, and certainly I think that's the clearest example why the Likert scale is categories rather than linear, right? Because strongly disagree, neither agree, strongly agree, that scale. Neither isn't equidistant between agree and disagree, right? Because as you said, sometimes they say, oh, so we can look on just the negative side and say, okay, well, 30% of people were negative to this. And or you could look on the positive side, and so if you're saying 30% are negative, that doesn't mean 70% were positive. It means some wouldn't answer that question. Now, is not answering the same as having no opinion?
They're not allowed to not answer. So you should have given them a no, I don't know, or don't want to answer.
Yes. So there is like this challenge of like so much gets put in that center option that you can't really put it on. Oh, that's a 3 on a scale of 1 to 5 of agreement.
On 2 of the questions, they are actually the ones, or at least in one of them, the neither is the one that actually has like the highest frequency.
Yeah.
Yes. So people will go, meh.
After answer or something.
I don't know what you want me to. So, I must admit I thought the demographic information was interesting, given that they're in the UK, and they had 11 students who didn't have English as a first language, but only 7 international students. So there are 4 UK students who don't have English as their native language. Which is interesting.
I would also actually like in the appendix or something, at least a link to what's the difference between the 2 degrees, because what is actually the difference between computing and software engineering? Does that matter or anything else? Do they do more programming in one of the courses than in the others? Like at least if you're listing it as a point here, then you're sort of adding that as a category. You need to like write why is that. Why does it make any difference?
Why is it relevant?
And also, why do they make all these categories when they don't actually discuss any of them? Like, you know, why do you care if someone is an English native speaker if you're never going to bring that up?
Indeed. And in fact, so for all of you guys doing your master's thesis next year, one of the things is when you ask people questions in Norway, we use NSD as our research organisation. You have to justify why you are asking particular demographic questions, right? If you don't have anything, if you have no hypothesis related to language, why would you even ask it, right? It's not necessary. If you don't believe that there is a reason to collect the data, you shouldn't collect the data, right? This is the new general data prediction in Europe is basically people give you permission to collect certain data for a certain reason, right? Now, if I have no reason to collect the data, I shouldn't be collecting the data, right? So in Norway, you would expect that this study wouldn't be allowed to ask those questions, right? You guys would probably be not allowed to ask those questions unless you could justify why, for your study, was it relevant, right? Now, if you did have a research question was, we believe that because coding game is in English, that students with English as English level below a certain amount will struggle, right? But then you wouldn't be asking if they have English as their native language, right? Because you guys, I wouldn't expect to struggle in English, even though you don't have it as your native language, right? But I don't actually expect there would be any difference between you and native English language speakers in this task. However, if some of you had a very low score on your English language, I'd expect you to be bad. But that wouldn't matter whether it's native, that would say what level you have in the language, right? So it's even the wrong formed question to elicit a hypothesis even if they had one, right? So yeah, you wouldn't be allowed to ask some of those questions, right? So yeah, no, it is, it would breach research ethics in Norway. Yep. Okay, any other things that you guys found annoying? Before PMS can come up with a whole bunch of things he sees most analysed, but yes. So PMS. What other problems did you find?
So one thing that sort of bumps in my mind is that technically coding game is just testing. So in this case, it could actually have been interesting to have a sort of control group that were not given the visual feedback, but given the same challenges, but just with like pass-fail or some sort of points, like to see if it was actually the game elements, or it was just the fact that they got testing that sort of was motivating. Especially seeing as they're comparing this to, you know, multiple choice questions, which isn't necessarily, but that's my next point. But at least it would be interesting to see, is there actually a difference there?
Maybe they could use code hand, for example,
yep,
as a comparison.
So is, because yes, control group. It's completely missing a control group. There isn't anybody else they asked about other experiments, groups who tried something else and got their opinion, or got people to compare two things.
One thing I'm also wondering, which is also something I found, is that this study, they say that they're based on the study of Ibrahim, Yusuf, and Mohammed and Jafar, the one that says that students' perception of using educational games to learn introductory programming. I don't know if you read that one,
Not sure.
but they have basically taken, they haven't lifted all the questions from there, but they've lifted a lot of the questions, and that's that research paper was actually on completely different types of games. That was on like shooting ducks that were like different types in C or programming languages, and crossword puzzles, which do you think that's sort of
a pretty different type of game? Yeah.
Which also I guess is where, that's specifically where they get the multiple choice question from, among others. So that's one. Also, the students' perception about how they're actually doing. Like, grades are quantifiable thing, you know, when you say like, okay, sure, you can say that like one grade is good for you, but there is like actually a measurement of what is a good grade. So why are we asking them how they feel they are doing? And who cares? Like, there might be a huge mismatch between those two. If you're the case that are struggling, you know, then you might think you're doing really great when if you're getting D's, etc., because that's what you're aiming for. But that's probably not what this study is actually trying to reflect. They're rather trying to see, does it make you, you know, better, which should then ask, how well are you, you know, actually doing?
So this question. So for the group here around the ethics of asking people, what are your actual grades like? So you guys did a survey last week in the expert in teams, where it asks what were your grades like, right? It didn't actually say like how do you feel about your grades, right? It asks you what, yes. So what grades? It didn't ask you like about how you felt about university, but actually explicitly asking grades. So one of the challenges with ethics is it can be very difficult, and sometimes you're not allowed to ask students their actual grade, right? So you're not allowed to say what is your grade point average, right? Because that's personal information. So instead of asking the personal information, they've asked, how do you feel about your grades?
But that's not the same thing.
Like, hoping that they're related, right? Now, I can assume that therefore they had a hypothesis that students who were good did better than students who were bad, or something like that, right?
They mentioned it then.
But if they were going to have that kind of hypothesis and do that assessment, they should have said, we have this hypothesis, we found no difference. Right? Because they didn't even they didn't mention that they didn't find things, right? And one of the main challenges in science is that we don't publish enough about not finding a result, right? Saying, oh, I think women will be better at this task than men, doing the analysis and go, oh no, men and women are the same. Okay. Well, if you did a good study with good data collection and you had a large number of people, you should be able to publish that as well and say there was no difference between men and women on this 3D rotation task or between men and women on this language task. You should still publish that, right? Because otherwise you get publication bias where results that are not, like, find no variance or don't find what the author sought don't get published. And so only the ones that align with what people think is going to happen get published. And so you get the skew if you average all the publications to just the ones that are showing there is a positive result, because the ones that show no result don't get published. So you get a skewed publication sample, right? So you guys did you guys do that in the publication, in the research methodology course?
I think we mentioned it.
Mentioned the funnel plot where you can plot the size of effect and the number of publications, and then try and estimate what the true effect is if you were missing, if all the ones that were kind of no effect or slightly negative were published, right? So you can actually try and work this out to try and find the hidden data. But yeah, so this doesn't even mention if they did an analysis on all of this stuff they collected and found that there was no difference. They certainly don't have enough data to say male versus female, right? So one woman can't represent all women. I think we're probably comfortable that that's true. I know if I don't want to have one man represent all men, so yeah, so they couldn't do that. But 15-15, you could have been looking at if you had groups that were large enough on each side to compare. And if you find nothing, still say we found no difference. Right? That should be included. Okay.
Also, it's the question of students actually being honest.
So when you were asked those questions in expert and teams, did you answer with your actual personality or the personality that you want to project to the world? Did you answer with who you are or who you'd like to be?
Hopefully who I am.
You tried to answer with who you are.
But the honesty is not just about the honesty, it's also about sort of, are you trying to give the teacher what he wants? Or are you affected by, the novelty of playing games? There's no discussion about that at all.
No.
And also, the thing that sort of scares me here is that there's actually a huge percent of people that doesn't like studying. Like, some of the questions are interesting in those regards, but there's only about 70% that actually like what they're doing with their life.
So there are a bunch of people who are going to university to get the piece of paper rather than they learn it, right? Now I've actually been struggling with this ethically recently around being a professor, right? Because a couple of my PhD students, they've had professors asked to be co-supervisors. And the reason why the associate professors want to be co-supervisors is, as one of the measures to become a professor, you have to be a co-supervisor of PhDs, right? So what they're doing is they're being measured on, are you co-supervising PhDs? And so the lecturer is going, oh, that's how I'm measured, I'll do that thing, right? Not because they want to help the student, not because they're interested in the area, but because they're being measured on supervision. And so I'll supervise you. I don't care what you're studying. I don't really care if you pass or not, because I'm not measured on whether you pass. I'm measured on whether I was written down as a co-supervisor. Now there's part of me that says, no. As an academic, you should want to help students do research. So you should want to be supervising students. And one of the things that is a measure of a good academic is that they help students. And so it's a good measure of a good academic is how many students do you help? But the problem is once you make that a measurable thing that you're going to measure, suddenly you remove that motivation and say, well, are we measuring good academics? Or having we told them that we're going to measure your co-supervising skill or co-supervising participation, you get people to behave in the way that looks like they're a good academic without actually being a good academic. Now, I don't know if any of you have had teachers who don't appear to be wanting to be in the classroom. Has that ever occurred to you? That this lecturer doesn't actually want to be here either? Well, you know, that's because they're being measured on something they don't really want to have to do, and so they're just turning up to get the metric done. Right? Now, 30% of the students in this course appear to be turning up to get a degree, not because they want to learn anything about programming. Right? And if you make games of things, it's one of our big challenges in any serious game is once we start putting numbers on something, do people do it for the numbers or do it for the learning? Right? Now here you've got 70% of people who are doing it for the learning, but there appears to be 30% who are just trying to get through. They don't really want to learn this stuff. It's just they're here to get the points. So I don't know how many of you are in this class just to get the points, because you know, some of you might be thinking, I don't really care about games, I just want to get the points. And that's something that, you know, we have to struggle with, is how, like, we come up with this idea of what a good applied computer scientist would be. But then we have these things, like we say, you have to complete. Whether you really enjoy being like that or not. Right? So it's really difficult to find that right balance. Right? And I'm at a meta level, the UK has publication targets. You have to publish a certain amount. I think you can see this is the output of that game. Right?
I also want to ask sort of the bias of the teacher or the professor, because he probably wants to keep his job. Because so this is me sort of projecting views onto him, obviously, but there's something I'm wondering here, because first of all, he's making a claim at one of the pages that he can't really, I feel, support, because he says, like, despite perceiving game-based learning as a worthy endeavor, the participants are not entirely convinced that it is that it can substitute traditional approaches in class or should be used on all computer subjects. So here he's actually injecting another thing, because the only thing he actually asks about where they are split, and there they are actually split, is that it should be used in all computer courses. There's like the other question there about that it can substitute traditional approach. That's actually never asked, and those are again two different things.
Yep. So he's injecting a conclusion
and skewing it towards the negative side.
And I would also say that, you know, the majority, if we're sort of looking at the overview here, the majority are leaning towards like neither or being very positive.
Yes.
In like 4 out of the 5 questions.
Yep.
And then they are, you know, they're not entirely convinced. I'm not going to say that they're entirely convinced, but say they're not entirely convinced. Feels, at least to me, to be that there's more skeptical rather than saying that they're, you know, neutral, positive or whatever. So I don't really see, like, it seems very conservative, and I don't really see why he came to that conclusion, because I looked at the numbers and came to the opposite conclusion.
Yeah. So when assessing papers, that's the sort of thing you should also be looking at, right? All of you should look at this kind of like, are the conclusions backed up by the data? Has the conclusion been informed by the data, or have I formed my opinion and then tried to find data to support it, or just manipulated the data until it feels like it supports it? And
that's where the sort of neither comes into place, because you can say that there's a majority that is skeptical on the last question if you say that neither is negative there.
Yeah.
And then just the last point, the thematic analysis, is just why is it there and how does it function?
There's no use to it.
Yeah, it's like it's waste of space.
Yeah.
So the thematic analysis, yes, is a waste of space. One of the things that you should, have you guys done how to do thematic analyses as a thing that you did in the research project planning, or in the research methodology course? No. Okay. So if you're going to do this kind of this coding, right? It's called coding, where you take English language and you turn it into like a semantic analysis, or where you code up every time they use the word good, or they use the word challenge, or they use the word game, and so you might decide that there are categories of words that are similar, right? So if you said the word hard, difficult, challenging, scary could all be considered, you know, a negative around difficulty, right? Maybe you wouldn't have scary, you'd just have challenging, hard, and difficult. Could all be, those are all have the same semantics. They have the same kind of meaning in this context, and so you'd group them that way. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to have two coders do this independently, right? So we give a set of, you know, we're supposed to encode what the student has said. I encode it, PMS has encoded it, and then we compare the two, right? So this is supposed to be, because otherwise I could be biased, I could be reading things in particular ways, and so it tries to remove the bias by having two people do it. And the idea is that you're trying to find underlying patterns that are similar between different people, even though they might use slightly different words for things, right? So that's why they're doing a thematic analysis. What you'd want to do is connect those thematic analysis
To something.
with something else, right?
Anything.
Yes, to anything like performance or number of, like 3 to 5 challenges. How many challenges? Maybe the people who didn't like it only got through 3, and the people who liked it got through 5. So maybe you could say something about how difficult people found it, affected their opinions of it, maybe.
Also, I know that you're not supposed to publish raw data necessarily, but if you're going to do something like that and you're not doing it double, like, because from what I looked at, out of the small samples that they gave, we actually found places where we're like, I don't see how you came to the conclusion that this belongs in this category, but I can check. I can't go and check that, you know, if that's just one mistake and I can sort of accept it, or if it's that all the other questions as well are you sort of being biased.
Skewing. So yes. So in summary, I think yeah, we can say that there are significant problems with this. It is bad that the peer review process still leads in this being published, right? Because this is not at what I would consider publishable level yet. But it has been published and it has been presented at a conference, right? The conference isn't a high-ranking conference, and that's one of the things to be wary of. This is obviously a very short, I just need to get a publication out. I'll just grab some of my students, I'll sit them down for a couple of hours, they'll play coding games, I'll ask them a bunch of questionnaires, I'll just write it up and get it out there, right? So this is somebody with like probably a week deadline saying you need another publication. You've got a week to come up with something, right? So I grab coding game and say, right, you students, you sit down, do this. Like questions, questions, I'll go find a paper. Oh, there's a paper with questions in it. Right, I'll grab those questions. I'll ask them those questions at the end of the coding game session. It's 2 hours, 1 afternoon. Right, I'll get all the students I can. Right, great, okay, all the groups, it's great. Okay, maybe they'll go the next £10 or something. I don't mention it here because I should have done, but if, like, were there any financial incentives? Were there any grading incentives? How did he get those people to volunteer? Did he feed them? Did he buy them pizza and beer? Did they like the lecturer? Right? Were they there because, you know, they're his study group or something, right? So he's their tutor, or so none of that's there, and it feels very much like I just have to get this in. Oh, there's a deadline there. Bang! I'll just get this out. Wham! Hey, I got in, and now I can present, and I get a free trip to wherever the conference was. So this is a problem, and games have this more than other disciplines because we're a cross-disciplinary area. So people push technical papers into education journals and education papers into technical journals, where the reviewing party don't know enough about the discipline to be able to evaluate it properly. Right? So it goes into an education conference because they don't know enough about programming or something like that, right? So you find this challenge in these mixed areas. Okay, so we'll take a break, we'll go away and we'll come back, and you guys could all see you could do a better job than this. Right? You should all see that you could do a better job than this. Okay, so go away and take a 10-minute break, we'll come back and we'll discuss the other paper. Right, I'm going to grab a coffee.
It is also useful to look at.
That's all the thing I can
Yeah, it's more likely you guys are.
Takk for at du lot den komme igjen. Takk for at du lot den artikkelen komme igjen.
Tomorrow, he was going to open the door. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I won't be there until
Like none of these sort of things you guys should be seeing and do this.
like get 1 hour head start and then go to
Og det ja, folk slet med motivasjon i 1998. Det 20 år siden.
yeah, so
Relevant.
If he's going to go.
yeah. I guess it is available the same way that it was last Wednesday.
Mye tid på å lese.
Vi satt mesteparten av i går og diskuterte det.
How much is it going to do?
Tok sin tid. Absolutt. Mesteparten av tiden var brukt på det andre artikkelen.
Probably the best to just sit in the VR lab or something and get the
Serious game for learning pointers og stuff. Som du kan se, her har du 4 roboter med car wheel in på long, og så skal du dragge riktig batteri i riktig robot. Og her er et av de andre spillene som de nevnte. Her spiller trommessen som skal dragge cargo inn i riktig skip. Her har du integer, car, boolean, real.
I was saying
Det høres jo likt ut, tror du ikke?
Thursday.
Så
Yeah.
som drag and drop.
Yeah, we were talking about that.
Ikke er det eneste gameplay mekanikkene som passer for
Saying that, but someone was saying that we should
Kanskje for sånn 20 år siden.
Yeah, actually, but that,
Yeah.
but you have to.
Kunne gjort det med immersive på en eller annen måte.
Ja, de snakker om hvor flott immersion er, fordi du klarer å båte en kjeller og lage lyder.
How long that
Og main-karakteren er jo kjempeattractive fordi det er deg.
No, I mean,
We also need a computer.
Det er bare vi klarer nesten ikke finne et eneste godt argument for det.
so for everything.
Vært fullt mulig. Bedre med eksempel av sånn tidselement som ikke er en spesifikk
Dette her er basically bare en quiz.
When I was programming,
Og de har basically kopiert mesteparten av det fra et annet spill, og bare lagt på nye assets. Eller lagt på ny art, da, på en måte. Og alt er på fransk, så du klarer ikke å verifisere en del av kilden selv. De har en kilde siterer en del ganger er fransk, liksom, så du kan ikke lese den. Så alle bildene her har jo bare fransk tekst. Hvorfor skrive artikkel på engelsk? Resten er på fransk. Altså i referansene deres, så jeg har bare en random link et eller annet sted her. Ikke helt stort enn nå. Kanskje det var lenger ned. Her. Bare random link til nettsted. Det er referansen hans. Referansen nettsted. Ikke noen som har blitt besøkt, eller hva det er, eller noen ting. Altså, game engine de har brukt er basically Scratch. Make iPhone, iPad, Android and Flash games without code. Så disse folkene har helt klart aldri vært på spill før. De har ikke noe peiling på game design eller game development eller noen ting. Så ja, det er koselig. Det er helt klart peiling på hva de driver med.
I've been using it as well to get
Man bare driver og plukker ut ting her.
other thing you took. I was thinking
Ikke så diskusjoner om spillet sånn. Ja, det kan man godt gjøre. I hvert fall for det. Altså begge av dem hadde ganske mye feil, men akkurat som kan ta kaka. Det sier for eksempel at det å skrive kode er det vanskeligste konseptet i serien.
I think science is talking about finding something on the history or something and letting it out and pasting it on the
Det eneste game-elementet de har er tatt tre liv.
yeah. That's probably something we can do that we haven't and for anything else that we have talked about. So.
Ikke noe scores, leaderboards, achievements. Det er noe for det. Antana kan være et problem. Real og long er ikke egentlig typer i C. Du har floats og doubles. Og long, som sagt, er noe du kan ha for en type, men det kan også være kind of egen type.
Yeah, but we could do that sometime soon, I think. So that we could use tomorrow to just try to make something in Unreal and try to make the steering wheel and pedals. And then, but I think that would be a pure relief for the group that we can just see that everything connects and then that we can actually make it work inside the envelopes. So we should wait with that until we have something completed. So we should get some structures in and just try to connect it and see if it responds. Yeah? But if there are steering wheels and pedals in the lab, we have a lot of work. Yeah, that could be a nice thing to have as a goal for tomorrow. To just try to make something.
Er det forskjellig serie eller?
Did you say?
Ja, det var det.
Before stuff. Yeah. Are you planning on being there at night? I thought we don't get up extra early and rush down there to open it for us, and then maybe we should. Yeah, because if he's there, either way, it's we don't really need to. It's better if we can say, hey, can we come on right now? Yeah, when we're ready. Yeah. Or we could sit there or just work as well, because there's an 8, isn't it?
I was thinking about the computer, maybe it's better.
Jeg har ikke skjermbilder på skjermen min, så
Du får ikke duplisert på den.
nei. Den liker ikke at det er forskjellige
Aspect ratios og størrelser.
Ja.
Ja.
Kind of depends if Simon can go with this as well. He can show us his work. That would be very yeah.
Det blir ganske komisk å høre på det.
Ja.
Bare det å nevne alle de rare tingene vi
Should I have some roads and something?
I just don't know the pick.
And some movement.
Jeg burde egentlig sitte på den siden der, uten at jeg ikke presser på. Nei, det er det eneste problemet som jeg har med Linux, er at det er ikke alltid så glad i å dele skjerm. Spesielt ikke gjennom den. Noen ganger så går det med å denne. Jeg kan forsøke teste det nå.
Okay, so that should be our main goal for tomorrow, to make something that we can test in evidence
Some design,
yeah.
distribution, and just change them.
Make everything work together. VR headset and stick pedals and
just so outdated graphics, so it kind of feels like 2002. I think it was early PS3.
So I remember PS3 being better visual.
Yeah.
I remember PS3
Yeah.
visually.
But there's a huge difference from the first PS3 games and the last PS3 games.
I was kind of late on the PS3.
Yeah. Have you played The Last of Us? Yeah. That's like crazy good graphics for PS3, and that was nowhere near that for. I don't know when it came out, PS3, maybe 2008 or 2009 or something. And then there were still games coming out to both PS2 and PS3.
Okay. So, Phoenix, you ready to present?
As soon as
Hearing things?
Yep.
Right. Okay, let's go. Oh, just right, so now we have a.
could you toss over the actual study? It's the one on top. So yeah, this is a bit longer study, so I'll just try to rush through the overview.
We can get through more of it, yeah.
Yeah, so the general outline, I'll first give a brief paper presentation.
Yep.
I'll try to get through it as soon as, yeah, and then answer the questions that were given, and then look at the criticism. So they don't really follow a proper email structure, so I won't either. So the intention, which they use the first 2 pages on, is basically that students are struggling with programming, and the problem they have is that pointers are really abstract and complex and high level, and that it's the most difficult concept in C, and their solution is to create a game that will make learning pointers fun. So they then go into a study of the current problems that that traditional methods are facing. That it's too theoretical, it's not motivating, students are focusing way too much on syntax rather than the actual semantics, and also that teachers aren't using the same tools as the students, or learners as they're called in the report, like IDEs, internet, etc. And they then come to the conclusion that teaching should be done through gamified challenges. And then they look at the benefits
they come
of games.
to a conclusion in the introduction. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then they list all the many benefits of using games, like learning concepts through thoughtful and concrete ways, fostering motivation and interest, and using tools that students are familiar with, and creating like realistic settings with meaningful and motivating goals, etc. And then they follow on to discuss the gameplay to the game that they're creating. They discuss 2 gameplay mechanics, which are the ones that are best for serious games, which is drag and drop and point and click, which they note is especially known for its suspense. And then they show 2 different sort of serious games that have been done using point and click and drag and drop. Then they move over to the pedagogical ways of approaching this, quickly discussing 2 topics, which is game-based learning, which is basically that you use your other senses as well to learn stuff. That's a really general overview. And then they move over to constructivism, which is, I guess, learning by doing and constantly reorganizing your knowledge, is how I understood it at least. And then they move over to the Solo Taxonomy, which is actually relatively okay explained. So it's the different structures of learning, which they have, which they have gotten from Biggs, I think was his name.
Biggs.
Yeah. And the reason that they want to use this for their game is that it allows sort of a teacher to describe the levels in a really standardized way, so they can, I didn't actually have that picture, but they have this graph written again, where they show that at each level they're supposed to know these and these things about pointers. So they use that to describe the topics and levels of skill. I'll just quickly mention as an aside, I find it really interesting that we're keeping these figures in here, because you start as a circle and then you become a pillar, and then become 3 pillars, and then you're connected 3 pillars, and then you get a parachute. That's how you know you're the best. So that's, yeah. But that's not where this study is going. So they use that to actually describe the different levels of the game, or levels, the different learning outcomes, so the goals. After they've done that, they go over to actually discussing their serious game, which is called Parable Serious Game, which is a game that's supposed to learn students about pointers. And they have this great story where you play as a student that is about to learn pointers. And and you do this by with drag and drop mechanics, which for like dragging words to definitions, and also having this abstract way of visualizing a pointer through a robot. So you drag batteries onto robots, which are, or onto black robots, which are pointers, and then you get to the next level where you assign an address card to make a robot point at something. And they have also added challenge to this by saying that you have only 3 lives. And here you can see pictures from the different games. So this is where the top right one is where they, or top left one, is where they tell you that you have actually completed the definition. So good on you. And in case you have forgotten it, the definition is here. Well, that's obviously the same definition that you just wrote in there. And then one of the problems with this article was that all the game is in French, so I had to Google Translate that. But one thing they do that is actually really good is that they point out your learning goals here, which I found out after actually translating them. And this is where you see you assign a battery to the correct pointer robot. And then this shows you that the robots can point to the other robots that are values in memory. I would have loved to show you how this game functions. The problem is that it isn't actually released, so we can't look at it. After discussing this, they move over to their sort of discussion and conclusion, which is that this game makes exploration fun and attractive. It learns people how to work with pointers. It's fun and has sound effects and events, and it enhances retention and transfers facts. And it is also currently under testing. So that's basically the summary of the article. It went really short, but that's because I feel that they're really padding stuff out. I hope I haven't forgotten anything really important.
Did any of you feel he missed anything from the paper? I mean, we could discuss the Solo architecture and taxonomy more, but we'll continue.
Yeah.
We can discuss with the problems of this.
Yeah. So, first of all, the question: the contribution is if we view it in sort of the most positive way, I guess the contribution is the game. But that's also not something we have actually been given. So, yeah. Just
the suggestion that a game exists.
Yeah. Just the result justify the conclusion. There aren't really any results, but there are conclusions. You can again, if we take the most positive aspect, then the game can count as a result, but that's not really connected with the conclusion. How does the title and abstract reflect the content? Well, the title gives indication of the whole language of C, but the actual content is just the basics of basics of pointers. They do mention Solo in their sort of methodology and that they used it for development, but they never actually discuss how, or they sort of mentioned how, but they never discussed what sort of impact it might have had. And the abstract is actually more reflecting there. They have mentions, pointers, etc. But that also left me wanting more, sort of. And repeatability. We don't really know anything about the game because they write a bunch of stuff that apparently the game does that they never show us. And also the game isn't localized, which is a problem. They haven't started testing, so we can't really repeat the test. And we don't know what sort of counts as testing. And the solution does the solution justify game elements? I've gone on a hard-on no, because it's basically just, from what I understand, so this is here the problem is that I have to say everything from me interpreting their text and their pictures, is that it's basically a glorified quiz. And they also make the topic way more abstract and complex than it needs to be. So yeah. And then for the problem statements, there's no actual real research question that we have found. The relevant concepts are, you know, the Solo Taxonomy, which I actually found that sure they give an okay explanation of that. The research goal, they don't explicitly mention that as a research goal, but I'm sort of getting the feeling that they want to create a game to teach students about pointers. The category of education, they're pretty clear on that. That sort of, you know, learning it involves education. The focus area is programming, narrowed to only pointers. They could have been way clearer about the narrowment at least earlier. And the target audience is novice programmers, which is a relatively specific audience. And I actually think also that came across relatively okay. And the customer, this is just me guessing, but I'm guessing it's the education institution, because they're the ones paying him to do research and probably also paying for the game. So yeah, just quickly on the criticism on the good part, you know, it's relatively new sources. If the rhythm is another, but many of them are okay, the ones that aren't 404 not found. They do actually, again, one of the good thing about the learning, they do actually present like the learning outcomes and goals to the players, so they have at least thought about that. I don't know if there's anything more I should say, or if we're just like jumping straight to shit talking.
Does anyway? So from this, which is a publication on some academics making a game, right? So they're trying to make the education better, right? So you can see that they want to make it better. Are there any other good aspects than in this paper that you guys have recognized?
I mean, they have read the definition of a game, I think.
Yeah. So I think so for me, the introduction to the Solo Taxonomy, right? So this idea that there's a different way of looking at learning outcomes, rather than just the Bloom's Taxonomy way.
Probably send it around, seeing as I forgot to put a picture of it. That's the actual table showing how the learning goals.
So the idea of having kind of abstract and depth, like, so you have abstraction level and the depth at which you know a particular thing at that particular level, right? So this idea that there's not just one hierarchy, but it's cross-disciplinary. And the Solo Taxonomy is used to criticize Bloom's Taxonomy. Now, as I said at the beginning, we are all stuck in a Bloom's Taxonomy Bologna process here in Norway, right? So I am supposed to write my learning outcomes to fit Bloom's verbs of what you guys are allowed to learn. One of the criticisms of that is I could ask you a simple, an early stage Bloom's Taxonomy question, right? Because it tells you what kind of question, right? Which is where I could ask you a question about game design is what is a dominant strategy, right? Where I'm just asking, do you know the definition of a dominant strategy, right? Now, you could either give me an answer which was something like a strategy that always wins in a game, right? Would be a very simple dominant strategy, one that always wins, right? But you could equally go into an actual interesting discussion about strategies and dominant strategies and how they're created and where they come from and why they exist in games, and you could actually make quite a rich answer to a relatively simple question, right? But the Bloom's Taxonomy says no. This type of question only has this type of answer, right? Because it doesn't really measure the quality answer; it measures the quality of the questions you're asking, right? And that kind of determines the level you're at. Whereas the Solo Taxonomy is this idea that your answer will have certain levels of abstraction of knowledge and also certain depths of that abstraction, right? And so when you're looking at creating an educational content, you might want to think both about the level of complexity that you're talking, as well as the depth at which you're going into that abstraction, right? So anytime you're talking about quantum mechanics or quantum theory or chaos theory, you're going to have this like levels of abstraction away from what is actually happening, as well as your depth of understanding at that particular level, right? So you guys might have beautiful knowledge of Newtonian physics, right? You can probably do massive amount, really deep knowledge of Newtonian physics, and you can have that without having any knowledge of quantum mechanics, right? And Newtonian physics is actually an abstraction, right? It is a nicer, cleaner view of the world than Einsteinian relativity. But, you know, you can go deep, or you could just have a very shallow, oh yeah, things bump into each other kind of knowledge of that, but then understand more about relativity and actually realize that speed affects time, and that you have unified space-time is a thing. So you might have kind of deeper knowledge, but at different levels, right? So it's trying to actually do that, and it is interesting to apply that to game levels. I found it somewhat challenging to apply the Solo Taxonomy to the game levels, because some of the more complex, like the game levels themselves, the first level where you're matching the words, it's hard to see how that's much deeper abstraction level than just, I'm just trying to get a definition, right? So I found that a slightly clunky way of trying to explain the levels was to say, well, this level has all of these layers in it, and then different amounts of depth of those layers, right? Those levels of abstraction, I think. And they don't do a good job of actually using that in their design, right? So I found that was Solo is good, but I don't think they used it well. So I'll let you guys go on to the bad. So Andreas could probably read off the bad and be the critic. Yeah. So did you agree with these bad things?
Yeah, we had a pretty lengthy discussion.
You ripped them apart. In a joyful bloodletting.
Yeah, there's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I can go through a couple of my points first, I guess. Yeah. So they don't really seem to have ever made games before, it seems to me, because they don't talk too much about game design, like at all, as far as I see. Mm-hmm. And they developed the game in a basically Scratch-like engine, so basically no coding required. So
I must have, and I also agree, I felt that their criticism of teachers not using the same ideas and internet as their students. Yeah. And I think, well, if you're going to teach C, how about you code your game in C?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you could have used this level, like the Solo Taxonomy, say, look, the students at a later level are able to see the C programming language, which we use to make the game about the C programming language. Wouldn't that be an extra depth, layer, complexity? Yeah, no, a missed opportunity, potentially.
And there's some other fun things as well. One thing serious games that they mention is the world of variables, basically. And if you read that paper, you'll see a lot of suspicious similarities between the two games. Mm-hmm. And like in one game, you're like dragging batteries to robots to like do pointer stuff and so on. And in the other, you're dragging cargo from alien cargo to spaceships, and it's all ints and reels and so on. Very similar types as well. They use real for some reason, both of them. So they're very suspiciously similar.
Yes, definitely true.
So yeah, it's interesting. There's a bunch of older stuff as well, but I'm not sure what to pick.
Oh, wait, so we can go through the list up here.
Yeah.
So seemingly contradiction.
Like those aren't actually necessarily contradictions. It's just that they're so unclear about their own terminology. Like they say that students are struggling with high complex or high abstract code, etc. But then, and that they worry too much about syntax. But then, you know, they make a game to teach about something that isn't high level and is 100% about syntax. So I'm sort of like, are they putting pointers as an abstract thing, or is it syntax? Because the game focuses on syntax.
Yes, the game focuses on syntax. And you know, they say that pointers are the hardest thing in C. And without any justification for why I think pointers are taught very badly by most people.
However, they do actually have justification for that, because we looked into the sources that come later when they repeat the claims, and they list pointers as relatively hard.
Yeah, but not the hardest.
But not the hardest.
So, yes,
and also not in C, in C++.
Yes.
And pointers are references as the same thing.
Yes.
So.
Yes. And actually in C, I think pointers are easier than in C++, right? Because in C++, when you have objects and you have kind of complexity built around object-oriented material, then pointers get much more complex than much lower level, where in C you're actually quite close to the addresses, right? You actually do stuff with memory directly, and so pointers make more sense. It's when you go abstract and make them objects, and then you cast objects, and it's what's going on with my pointers?
Constructors and destructors.
Yes, yes. Whereas I found malloc relatively simple. When you say, I'm going to allocate some memory. Where is it? Oh, it's there. What's the address of it? Oh, it's this. How much of it? Oh, it's that much. Okay, and then I can do anything I like with. Yeah. Okay, great. That makes sense to me. So yeah, so no, I found that unjustified kind of just saying, oh, we've identified this problem, we're fixing it. Why is that the problem? Well, it's a problem we can fix. It's not the most important problem. But yes.
It seems like, though, it doesn't seem to be only this guy who makes like the groundless claims about everything being hard. We went through a lot of studies, and in most of them, everyone like in the abstract, programming is the most difficult subject ever, without actually coming with any sources.
And students are struggling with it.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I can sort of relate to that, seeing as we lose half our students throughout the course. Obviously, there's some difficulties involved. It's just that it would be cool to see, you know, the one study that everyone sort of get that fact from, or if it's always like, I'm a teacher at the university and half of my students fail, you know, which is at least something, but then you can at least say that.
One of the things you've got to watch out for, and you do see it in that response, is that the thing that people do themselves is what they consider difficult, right? So if you're a programmer, you consider programming difficult. But art, that's easy. Design, that's easy. Writing, that's easy, right? All those other people have it easy. What I do, that's hard, right? And you see that around a lot of disciplines, right? Is that they assume that what you do is the hard thing and what everybody else does is the easy thing, right? And you see this in management. A lot of management people say, you know, oh, it's managing people, that's where it's really hard, right? And you guys just do code. That's simple, right? And so there's this issue of self-reflection on what you're good at is what's important to be good at, and what is difficult to be good at, right? And so you get these people who are teaching something saying, oh yes, what I teach is really hard, right? And you'll find this in a lot of academics who'll go through their areas and they'll think what they teach is the good stuff, and it's the important stuff, and it's the stuff that's really going to make it hard for you and really going to learn in my paper because I'm a great teacher and, you know, I teach the hard stuff. So you do get some of that self-bias, and yeah, it would be nice to have an objective measure of some of those things, right? And usually people don't actually do the studies in that area.
Also, the definitions are really narrow, so all serious games are made for education.
Yes.
And they jump they like the fact that they focus on a completely wrong problem, I would say, because they just jump to the conclusion that, you know, we need a game. But so basically this entire segment talks about, you know, how the professors are using internet or IDEs or everything, and they're probably using it, you know, just doing like learning coding on Blackboard, which obviously is actually, you know, without practice theoretically.
On a blackboard, not on blackboard.
Yeah, no, on a blackboard. Yeah.
I write code
Which,
on the blackboard, and then you guys type it into the computer.
Obviously, the students are correct thinking that that's theoretical without practice and not motivating. But also they go through then list all those stuff that they aren't using IDEs, etc. And then just conclusion. So the conclusion is, to sum up, we should make programming a game. And you're sort of like, where did they get the idea of the game? Because I would say no. The solution is that the teachers should start using the internet and IDEs and do like coding, etc. So, and then obviously it's quite clear, as Andrea said, that they don't know games at all. I think the best part is the one where they say that in contrast, learning is not as challenging as video games, especially when it comes to learning programming languages. So programming is harder, or programming is easier than, or learning to program is easier than playing video games, which is why we're all here, I guess. Also,
because you don't want to take on the challenge of playing video games. You came to university because this was easier than playing those nasty Call of Duty games and FIFA.
But that also doesn't make any sense, because if playing computer games is hard and learning programming is easy, why are we trying to learn your programming through a game?
Because harder makes it makes you learn better.
Harder is better.
Yes.
And then obviously the game isn't the game. So they have this whole conclusion about, or whole discussion about what the game does and what it doesn't do. And I look at that and I'm like, okay, where's the pictures of that? Because it might be that you're telling the truth, but I can't play the game, so I can't verify that if I go into a basement and then hear a door creaking, I have to, and the lights go black, I have to figure out how to, turn on the lights. Which, how is that related to pointers? And also, who gives a shit? And why didn't you at least show me a picture of that happening?
Yes. So part of the bringing this kind of paper to the fore is these are academics making a game. These are not game developers making a game, right? And it is quite clear that they have no idea what a good game looks like. And as you say, the suspicious similarities to another game is that they saw someone make a game and they thought, oh, that's a game, we can do that. So they made the same thing and just changed some of the examples. Now, and a terrible thing they did when they went from the variable game, right, where this idea that you have containers which are different types because they could be different size or they could have different shape, right? Those containers going on a container vessel, and you say the container vessel is like RAM and these containers are like variables, right? That kind of actually aligns with what's going on, right? Is that you do have bits of memory that are of a certain size and a certain shape, and you're putting them in RAM, they're of a certain size and a certain shape. But then changing that to being batteries that you put in robots is well, unless those batteries are like AA batteries and the little round batteries and big car batteries, if you made those batteries different, then that could have been some additional learning going on. But no, it just seems to test the click one of these is the right answer.
And also 3 of the 4 batteries or robots are actually integer robots, really. They're not they're not int, but they are integer. And depending on your architecture, they can't fit. So there's not technically correct answers.
So yes, they're both. Their game is a terrible game, and they've lost. And you see this. They've lost some of the subtlety. When the Solo Taxonomy itself is about some of those subtleties. It's supposed to be about hierarchical complexity, and there should be some things that at a simple level you can get, right? So you see, pointers point to memory. Okay, yep. So that's one concept. But then if I embed that, but memory of certain types is pointed to by different types of pointers, and I can have that can be another level of complexity. And you could still encode that in your analogy, which is the battery robot analogy. But they don't do that, right? They just do, we do a quiz game.
Also, you could
But
have
we make it
waited.
pretty.
You could have waited releasing to the study until you were actually finished testing it.
You could have actually given it to some students and had them actually try it.
Yeah, because it says here, at this stage, the game is under testing by students. So, you know, if you just wait a month, then they will probably be finished, and you can have results.
So this is also what we call salami slicing, right? Where I have a study where I make a game and I see if it's useful. But now instead of getting one paper out of it, I want to get 3 publications out of it. So I do one publication as me making the game. I do one publication of the students' opinions of the game. And I do one publication of the students' results from the game. Right? So I try and get 3 publication points out of something that's probably only 1 publication point. And by slicing it thinner, I then increase my, and because I refer, so in my second publication, I refer to the first publication. And in my third publication, I refer to the first 2 publications. This first publication now has 2 citations. Right? Which increases my citation count in my citation index on Google Scholar. So I get more points, and so I look like a more important academic, because people are referencing my work.
Also, this one is really nitpicky, but they have a sentence there, so this goes on language, which basically, like, after learners become familiar with each concept, we ask them to complete a quiz to assess their level on that particular concept. He or she could repeat the test as many times as needed, but with different questions each time, which I find relatively impressive. Like, if you can, I can take a quiz for like an infinite amount of time, and I will always be presented with new questions about how basic pointers work. That's, you know, if that's tech, that's groundbreaking.
Yeah, I don't think they're quite at that level. So yeah, I know. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was the publication channels. Now, NSD, and I'll see if I can find for, so rather not NSD, where have we got it? I put it in, but I'll just grab it. DBH, as part of NSD, have a database of publication channels. No? So one of the things you do in Norway, if you're playing the game of being an academic, is you look for how you score points. You get 1 point for a level 1 publication and 3 points for a level 2 publication. Yeah? And I've seen a suggestion that an average Norwegian academic should score 1 point per year. Now, there are 3 authors on this paper? Or 4? 4. So each of these authors would get 1/4 of a point. Right? So they'd have to publish 4 of these to get their 1 point. Right? If they've co-authored things. This particular journal they're publishing is a full 1 point level journal publication. Yes, it is a full 1 pointer in Norway. Right? It is one of the ones that is listed as getting you a full publication point. Right? So what you do in Norway is you go through and you kind of find journals. Now, we get some agency in our game. Every year, academics can suggest particular journals to be made into level 2 journals. Right? So we make a case to try and get some of the journals made to level 2. Now, only 1/3 of all the listed journals are allowed to be level 2. So what they do is they drop some out when an academic suggests putting new ones into level 2. Right? And they add all these level 1s. And what we have to do is try and find ways, like, if we're playing our game properly and scoring points, we would try and find level 2 publications to publish into, and then, like, and if we can't publish in level 2, so you send it to a level 2, they reject you, then you send it to level 1, they reject you, you send another level 1, and another level 1, and another level 1, until someone eventually gives up and publishes you. Right? And you just keep doing that process, and you try and score as many points as you can, because that gives you the best score in the Norwegian research publication system, and the government pays you per publication. So there is additional funding. When I was offered a job in Oslo, they offered me the same salary as here, but then said I would get all of the additional funding from this publication channel. Right? So if I publish, the additional university funding that comes through with those publications would go directly to me as salary. As the incentive to publish is I would get paid to do this kind of thing. right? So instead of saying, oh, I'll get 10,000 kroner for doing one good study, I salami slice it up and try and get as many publications as possible to get the government to pay me as much money as possible. Right? Which is why you guys are now being drowned in this kind of low quality publication, because around the world each government is incentivizing people to do this sort of thing. Right? In the UK they have the research exercise. In Norway we have the NSD publication system and the RBO, the research-based funding. In America you have publish or perish, and basically it's all on the score and the counts. And to some extent the victims of this game, right, of this gamifying, is you guys as students trying to find good quality things to reference and read. Because when this, hopefully, when these guys finish their game and they do a study of student opinions, that would be a publication, and they'll do a study of how this first group of students used it, that would be a publication. Then they might do another study on how a second group of students use it. Then you have 4 papers that you'd have to read to try and extract one piece of information. Right? Was this any good? Right? Now, that makes your life much harder, because they're all in these different publication channels and potentially all in different journals, which means your university would have had to pay to have access to all those journals. Or you as a member of the public, or you as a teacher would go, well, we can't, like, I have to pay, and I think this is like $30 to buy this publication if you're not at the university.
I hope not.
Yeah, no, if you go in through like non-university network, I think this journal is like $30 for this paper, and you get to the abstract, or you have to pay $30 to read the rest of it. Right? Now, that's really obscuring research. That keeps research away from the people who need it, which might be programming teachers at an underfunded university that might not be able to afford every particular journal you place all your research into. Right? So for me, this is it's academics who don't understand making a game. They don't tell you if it's any good. They come up with a whole bunch of assumptions that games are going to be better than whatever else the teachers have been doing. And I know some of the because this is Morocco, right? And so I know some of the style of their education, which is, you know, writing on the blackboard lines of code, and and the students typing it in to a text editor, and then compiling it in command line, right? Because that's what the lecturer did when they went through university, and so that's what they teach you in first year. Right? Now, yes, most things are better than that. Right? Certainly using an IDE and trying to have test cases and doing things would be better. You don't need a game for it. Right? That's why I ask these questions of, does this need a game? And I think to make it better than what they're currently doing, it doesn't need a game. I think coding game might be a good way to learn to program.
Coding games, at least coding game teaches you to code.
Yes.
While you know coding.
By actually coding and giving you feedback on have you succeeded. What coding game does very badly, and I would have, and that's why I'm annoyed at that paper, the coding game paper, is because coding game doesn't give you any feedback on the quality of code you write. Right? There's no linting, there's no static code analysis, there's no memory usage or leaking or security. It's just kind of write whatever shit you like, just get it to work. Coding.
Well, I tried to, because was trying it, but I hated that, because I found it impossible to figure out where to go on the page in the editor.
Right.
But I mean, that might be because of the late night then.
You have to set it up so that you can actually use your real code editor, and then you have a sync gap. So I write the whole thing in Sublime and then press a button and then it gets transferred to coding game. Yeah, because that IDE is terrible. They do allow other people to comment on your code. The problem is that those aren't necessarily people who know what they're doing either. So one example that I found was the one where you're supposed to compare mountains. Most people there, especially in the really high level languages, usually you would do that through like a for loop. You would just have one loop where you read each item and then you compare it. Is it larger than, you know, the largest item I've found so far? What a lot of people do is that they read in all the mountains, put them in a list, sort the list, and then get, you know, yeah. So you've just taken like something that is ON and turned it into, you know, God knows what.
So that was I'm talking about what I've also found interesting was I tried that for different that mountain thing for different languages. What irritated me, they used echo and print where in the language it's not the standard of using it.
No.
So I was trying, wait, why do you print here? You don't use print in JavaScript really?
No.
So, but anyway, my problem, that's not that problem, when you said follow code, because on the mountain, the first thing I tried to do was just to hard code it, and it actually responded to that and said that this is a 0% because this is a hard coded answer. So they will actually have a test case to check that hard coded results is not good.
Yeah, so they did test something, but they don't test the quality of the code that you write. So they're not actually, they're just checking that it works rather than checking that it was good quality, right? So now the two games here, the coding game I think is a great way of giving you fun little puzzles that make you think about how to get something working. I don't think it makes you a very good programmer. I think it gets you to get things done, right? The pointer, the C game, I think the discussion on alignment, being like the game actions that you do in game, right? That dragging and dropping, you could actually have made that related to pointers, because pointers are about things moving around and taking memory and putting it in places. You could have actually made the action itself related to pointers, but they didn't. They just made it a quiz game.
They added in a bunch of bells and whistles though.
They added in bells and whistles, they made it massively complex and didn't benefit from any of that, right? So I think this is an example of a very bad game which adds game abstractions and game complexity without benefiting from any of that, right? So I think it fails on alignment, it fails on agency, right? It might give you some confidence because it at least gives you some feedback, but I don't know if it's like the challenging thing in the game is what you get feedback for, right?
The feedback, from what I understand, seeing as you have 3 lives, they can't actually give you proper feedback on, you know, what's the right answer, because then you still have 2 more tries. So then you could just brute force your way. Or it would be easier, you can still just brute force your way. But, you know.
Yeah. No, it is, and the concept of 3 lives, you know where that comes from, right? Where does the concept of 3 lives come from, and why was it created?
Getting you to pay more at the arcade?
Getting you to pay more at the arcade. Because what we wanted to do is people put 20 cents in. When I was a kid, it was a dime or a nickel when they first came out, but you put some money in, and we didn't want people to keep playing. So we had to have them die and stop, so they'd put more money in the machine. Right? And having just 1 life was too harsh, right? Because if you just immediately die and have to put more money in, people got upset about that because they'd make a simple dumb mistake early and then get frustrated and walk away, right? So you give them 3 lives, because the first one is your dumb life, right? Where you just make a simple mistake. The second one is you're now starting to get into the hard areas and I'm giving you a second chance. And the third life is when you get out and you have to give me more money, right? Now, what a lot of games would do is they, having used up your 3 lives, if you put money in quickly and hit OK, you could then continue. Right? And so what you do is you just feed money in, and you'd have someone there feeding money in and you hitting OK, so you could continue with the game even though you kept dying. Right? And that was a way of kind of extracting more money out of people at arcades. Right? It's not a great game mechanic. Right? It is just something we use to try and extract money out of people. So bringing it into something that you're not trying to get money out of people, they're just trying to say, oh, let's make it risky. And it's kind of like, no, if I've got as much time as I like, I just have to restart. What I'm risking is being bored more. Right? And that's, you know, that's not a great way to encourage people to keep playing your game, is by just saying, haha, we're going to make you do the stuff you've already done again and again and again and again and again, right? That's actually a really bad game mechanic, right? So, yeah, it doesn't make sense, right? They've just done it badly. They just like whacked a game mechanic in without understanding it, and they've done it in the wrong context and not used it as proper motivation. So you're going to say, Tony?
Oh, no. I was trying to be funny and bring in loot boxes.
Loot boxes, oh yes, yes, they could have. Obviously, if they had been reading this year, because they were obviously published this last year, so, but yes, they would have added loot boxes in to their game, and you would have had pointer loot boxes, which would have given you random bits of memory.
So you just take fault whatever. No, like yes. the one time you get something valuable is where you don't take fault because you're not pointing to trash.
Yes, so you get like valid memory.
Yeah.
Occasionally out of your loot box, but you have to keep dropping loot boxes to see if you can get some memory to use in your program.
That would be a line at least.
Well, it would
to a certain degree.
Well, I suppose if you considered malloc a loot box, you could then go and see what was in the memory that you allocate, right? Because in C, when you allocate memory, right? So how much C have you guys done? Have any of you done C programming?
Oh, it's half of one semester.
One semester, you did a little bit of it. Okay, so you know the difference in calloc and malloc? So malloc allocates you a block of memory, but leaves whatever was there in it, right? And calloc zeroes it out. So what you could do with loot boxes is you could do malloc and then see if there were any strings of interest in the memory you'd been given. Because it was just whatever random bit of memory happened to be lying around, which could have been memory used by another program. So it could have been storing variable names or people's information or scores or anything. Passwords. It could have just been any random bit of memory which had happened to be being used. And like a loot box, if you find something useful, great, yay! So yes, you could loot box malloc in a pointer system. It would just very rarely would you find something useful. Though you might find some strings. You could probably do a malloc and search for string values and character values, and you could probably find some strings lying around in memory that were of previous other programs that had been running on your machine. Right? It's a bit of a random attack, but it's still a memory attack. Okay, so right now we need to sort out next week. So I actually had to do this with Mahesh, because you sent me an email. Okay, actually I've got that one, seeing it's longer, and that means I don't have to move my machine. Right. So, if I go to that course, is it going to find it? Do I have to tell it to search? And put detected and go computer. And go duplicate. And go there. Right, so under course information. Right, so the schedule. I had suggested that Mahesh and Anisi. So,
I guess it's Anastasia.
Anastasia, right? So Anastasia. So that's how there. So Anastasia on cognitive training games for next week.
Okay.
Is that cognitive training games, Anastasia? You had put your name down for?
I'm not sure. But I don't mind about this
Okay.
topic.
Okay, so Anastasia. So if we go to, I'll just edit that. And I'll need to turn off. I've got to watch out that sometimes it screws around with the formatting. So and go. Stay here. N-A N-A S
T
yes
A S double I A.
Double I. Right.
And A.
A. Right. Okay. So Anastasia and Mahesh will do cognitive training games. So there's we've got a couple of papers in the there's 3 papers in that category. Have you played any of the any online learning cognitive games?
I'm not sure.
Okay, well we'll give you some
But I
paper.
can try.
Yeah, so one of the things for the cognitive training games, Lumosity is the big player in this space. However, they have, so interestingly, Lumosity, what their business model was, is to go around buying all of the other cognitive training games, right? So they bought a whole bunch of small companies that were doing cognitive training games and just bought them and got all their stuff. And so their goal was to buy, and anybody who had any patents on any cognitive training games, they would try and buy them to bring all those patent control so they could be a patent troll as well as a cognitive learning game. They then had recently they got fined by the FCC, I think it was, or so for false advertising about the benefits of Lumosity as a cognitive training game, right? Because when you advertise that you have an effect in the US, it's false advertising if you can't prove that effect, right? So there is Lumosity court case. So yes, so 2016. So okay, it's now 2 years ago, but they were fined millions for false claims about brain health benefits. Okay, they are still the biggest player in this space. Right? So this is so there are some of the studies that they put out saying, hey, Lumosity is fantastic, and then there are other people trying to repeat those studies saying, wait a minute, Portal is better than Lumosity at training you to think, and so we can look into those 2 publications channels, right? So Lumosity, one area of study, but there are also a bunch of other brain training games. So there's also the Wii game, a very old one, which was Mind. No, what was it? Doctor.
Brain Age.
Brain Age. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, Dr. Kosher's brain training or whatever.
Yes, Dr. Kawi. Yeah. Who apparently isn't a doctor in neuroscience. But yeah. So no. We can look at brain training. Also, what you guys could potentially do, just to see, so for the rest of you, I'll put this in the links, but there's a couple of cognitive testing locations that I've used and that our students have used. So, Cognitive Fun. So, Cognitive Fun is basically, what's it doing here? Sign in. Okay. Yeah, it remembers me. Cognitive Fun is a bunch of cognitive tests. It's not really fun. It is just straight cognitive tests. I would be interested in you guys having a look and doing some of these cognitive tests. So I'll put this link out in an announcement. And so there are attention, perception, executive function, item span, memory, and some random experimental tests, right? But so, for example, they do there are various cognitive tests written on the computer, so you can sit there and play with them and see what your performance is, right? Now, to some extent, this is enough of a game for some people to get interested in how do I improve my performance on these tasks, even though I just given a score, right? That's what it's a hard cognitive task, so I'm going to try and learn how to do it. So, for example, the NBAC procedure, which is really so a 2-back. Oh, this is dual, so I'm supposed to also have my audio on. So this is the example of what you might see. So here, T square, Q, no, part, that was in the same place, but wasn't the same word. P, so
key,
trial 3, right.
Key.
I've got to try and work out how where I'm supposed to click to agree.
Key.
Okay, Right, so it's here and there.
2. C.
So
C. Sod.
okay, no, I'll go back.
C.
So the J, that one's not giving me what I wanted to. So what I'm looking for is standard NBAC. So that's not executive, item span, memory. I don't want dual NBAC, I just want working memory test NBAC. So this is a working memory test. The NBAC procedure, so 2BAC, is I've got to remember the previous displayed item, right? So I click start here and it goes boot, cheese, boot, that's true. If that was cheese, I'd click it. If that was boot, I'd click it. If that was pencil, I'd click it. If that was cheese, I'd click it. If that was pencil, I'd click it. If that was book, I'd click it. If that was pencil, I'd click it. If that was ball, I'd click it. Can you? Yes, spoon. No. Yes, spoon. Yes, car. Yes, spoon. No spoon. No fish. Yeah, no, I got that wrong. Okay, so what you're doing is you're constantly replacing your previous known item with that. So it's kind of how good are you at cycling through having a rotating memory. Now, of course, this is 2BAC, so I can reload, and I could do 3BAC, 4BAC, 9BAC.
That's when you start asking, like, when is this actually useful?
So, can you remember what item was presented 9 items ago? And then have that constantly shuffling. The answer, I don't think any human being should be able to do that, right? If you can, you are exceptional. Even 2 is hard, 3 is hard, right? So 3, back, so spoon, boot, ball. No, that hard. No. Maybe? Yes! Maybe? Yes! I don't know. I'm pretty sure not. Maybe? Yes! No, I don't think so. Oh. Heart, maybe? No. It's hard to kind of replace that item because you've got to remember all the items and be shuffling them out at the right time to remember that back part. But, you know, you do this and you get a score and you can try and get better at using it, right? So one of the discussions is, this is a good test for knowledge, right? For cognitive function. Is getting better at this improving your general cognitive function? So does improving your score here actually mean you're better in the real world?
Or are you just better at the game?
Or are you just better at the game? Right? So that's one of the big challenges of cognitive training games, is do you get better at the game and no better at real life? Right? So given that this is a symptom of being like people who are bad at this are bad in real life, and people who are good at this are good in real life. But if you make people better at it, do they get better in real life? And we think, well, probably not. It doesn't appear to be, right? So that's the challenge that Lumosity has. All the cognitive games have is, do training you on the game make you better in real life, right? So that's what we'll be looking at next week for YouTube. Okay, and so I put in the rest of the schedule there so far. And if someone's missing, you need to email me. I will send this out as well as the 2 papers for you guys to review. Now, the Lumosity paper, what we'll do is we'll have one Lumosity paper where Lumosity is trying to tell you how wonderful it is, and we'll have a counter example paper showing you how good other things are compared to Lumosity, which doesn't seem to give any benefit at all.
Will both be bad this time, or?
No, we'll have the Lumosity will, well, interestingly, the Lumosity papers are generally pretty good. It's just, you know, they're really selective in how they pick people and trying to make it look good, right? So the quality of the paper will be much higher, but still potentially flawed. But it will be harder to pick that flaw because it won't be quite so obvious as these 2 quite flawed papers. Okay? So we'll be starting to move up in the quality of paper, but still there are some issues around why people are doing certain things, and this is certainly a challenge when you have Lumosity paying you as a researcher to tell them that their games are good. And if you don't find anything, they don't want you to publish it and say, oh no, you can't, you're not allowed to publish that now. It's kind of, what? Well, you know, they've got control of the data and it's their data you're using, so they've got permission on whether or not you publish it. So basically they can just stop you publishing anything that uses their data that they've provided you that doesn't agree with what they want you to find. Right? So that creates some and you know, if I was saying, you know, I've got a dice here that always rolls 6, and they just never tell you when it doesn't roll 6, it certainly looks like a dice that rolls 6. I'm just like, so yeah, and I could, if I rolled a dice 1,000 times, I could probably find a sequence where it rolled 6 3 times in a row. And so long as I'm really selective about what I show you, I can say, look, this dice is, you know, it's really, it always goes to a 6. It's a great dice. Buy my dice. So yeah, it's a problem with publishing. It's a problem with selective publishing. So we can discuss that more next week, and there'll be fuller studies next week as well. Okay.
So is this an excuse to find Portal 2 again?
Yes, we can use this as an excuse to find Portal 2, and you guys can play Portal and become smarter by playing Portal 2. If you want to play Portal 2 and become smarter, it's better than playing the training. It's better than Lumosity anyway. So, okay. Any other questions? Okay, great. We'll see you mostly tomorrow. It's not like you get away from me for very long. So, okay.
By the way, about colony games, I've seen the most elegant solution to a problem